I'm the project manager for the Northern Grapes Project. Today we're doing something a little bit different. During our webinar session, our live webinar session on the 14th, Greg had some audio problems. So what we're doing is we're doing a redo of the webinar so that we have a good recording to be able to post online. I was able to go back to the recording and get the questions that were asked during the live session of the webinar. So we'll still have a Q&A at the end. So Greg, thank you so much for agreeing to redo this webinar. Just to tell you a little bit all about Greg, he is a business consultant with Farm Credit East and directs the Winery Benchmark Program. This is the second webinar that Greg has done for us, and we really do appreciate the support from industry professionals. So Greg, thank you so much for doing the webinar the first time, and thank you again for doing this redo. We really appreciate it.
Great. I appreciate the opportunities as well, and it's always great to present to wineries and vineyard owners. So let's get going. And today's presentation is about transitioning to a commercial sized winery. So we're going to talk a bit about business planning at this stage. And as Crystalline said, I'm a business consultant for Farm Credit East, and I've been doing that for the last 3 years, and I serve wineries and dairy farm clients in the Finger Lakes. Just to give you a little background, prior to that, for 15 years with Farm Credit East, I served as a commercial loan officer, also working with wineries and other agricultural businesses. And since 2011, I've been the director of the Winery Benchmark in the Northeast. And just to give you a little sense for what that is, it's a group of about 3 dozen wineries, or we're shooting for more as well, who will provide their data, and we do a rigorous financial analysis, all in the same standard, and do a meeting once a year in August. It's a program where we really explore how the industry is doing in the Northeast, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of each individual winery. And each participant in the benchmark is able to sort of get a sense, well, has a custom visit by the consultant with them after the meeting. So that's enough of that, but in any case, today we're going to talk about, this is our outline of our talk, the presentation, and it's going to start with a little intro to kind of set you up for what stage of business we're really talking about. We're going to walk you through how to analyze your customer base and the kind of traffic that is available to you where you're going to place your winery. We're going to help you decide what your business model should be and how to sort of define that and bracket that and what the implications are, and help you figure out what size of business is going to work for you, kind of help you ask the right questions, if you will, and then evaluate your sources of capital, whether they be debt capital or equity, and the implications of that as well, and then sort of help you set up a budget and finalize your decision, and then a little time for Q&A at the end. So a typical winery startup is going to be at least 5 years of vineyard development. That's assuming that you produce your own grapes, and most of the participants on the Northern Grape webinars do produce their own grapes. And so that's going to take a while to get you to the stage where you're going to produce wine. And during this time, you're also going to be pursuing, of course, your winery license and other business permits, probably building a production area, and acquiring wine equipment. So at this stage, you may be at a point where, hey, you've produced wine and sold perhaps your first 500 cases or so of wine, friends and family first, and then to others. And your tasting room perhaps is just a very informal setup, could be out of your garage, for instance. So what's next? Well, the next steps could be to build or rent a full-size tasting room and really try to market and establish a presence on a wine trail or other setup. You're going to also be probably in a position where you need to build more inventory and produce wine anticipating those sales. So you can't kind of sit still, but you're going to need to be expanding the production space and buying more equipment and tanks. You may even be in a position where you can't grow everything, so you'll be going out to buy more grapes and, of course, build more inventory. So what we're describing here is really a second phase of capital investment. And this is also an opportunity for you to refine your business plan. You may have had a business plan either in your head or on paper, but here's an opportunity now that you're at the stage of business to refine that. That's kind of what we're talking about today. So the decisions you will have to make at this time will be what type of processing equipment, what's the size of your production facility, the size and style of the tasting room. Not only that, you'll be sort of refining your brand marketing and who are you to the public, what style of wine. Is this going to be a very creative brand, or is this going to be a conservative sort of brand? And then how much you're going to spend on advertising, promotional events, and then finally, last but not least, what about staff? What kind of staff will you be retaining for your next effort, and how much will you have to pay to retain those folks? So a lot of big decisions. So back to our outline, first you really need to analyze what your customer base is going to be or what it could be. And the sources of data you will want to explore will be, you'll be looking to perhaps talk with other wineries. And although you may be a competitor, a newcomer on the scene, we've oftentimes seen other wineries willing to collaborate or share their experiences. So not everybody will, but you probably will, if you chat around a little bit and tell people what your intentions are, be able to gain some excellent advice. Winery associations in your region, or wine trail associations perhaps, can also be a tremendous asset to exploring your business plan. Don't overlook the traffic counts available from your Department of Transportation. In New York State and other Northeast states, we've found online free and open access to traffic counts on various county and state roads. And this can give you a sense for what the traffic is coming through your area, and then through other means you can try to anticipate how much you'll net of that traffic to your winery. Also, your county tourism board can be an excellent resource, or your other types of tourism associations. There are lots of support. People are excited about the potential jobs that come out of tourism, and sometimes you can find some very valuable data through that source. And in the Northeast, we have the unique opportunity to have some data from the winery benchmark that can guide business plans and help refine the approach to your business. So some of the things you may find out in your exploration are things like this. And this data is from the winery benchmark. However, you'll note that I've stripped all the numbers out of it. We aren't, our data in the winery benchmark is exclusively available to the participants who pay for the benchmark. So in this case, I'm presenting data for conceptual reasons. It's live and real data, but nevertheless, it's stripped of the numbers. But I think it serves the purpose. So in this region, this actual region A, sweet wine dominates. So knowing this is a very valuable tool. You can see here that 2/3 of the wine is either sweet or semi-sweet. And what that means is sweet wine is, in our case, is over 4% residual. Semi-sweet's over 2.5% residual. So 2/3 of the wine here is very sweet. Nevertheless, dry wine, although it doesn't come up to quite a quarter, is still a substantial piece of this region. If you go to the next region, region B, you'll see that things flip around a bit. Dry wine comprises almost exactly half of the total wine sold in the region, and semi-dry, so this is one, dry wine is less than 1% residual. Semi-dry is up to, I think it's 2%. And so most of the wine here is dry, and sweet wines, just a sliver, this blue section here, probably in this region, this wine is quite a bit of it is going to be ice wine. So in region A, the sweet wine is table wine and blends of various kinds, whereas in region B, you kind of know here that you're going to be looking to some vinifera and other types of dry wines as well as some ice wines. And if you don't have that, you're going to be an outlier in your region. In addition, these types of data points also relate to, the style of wine relates to the retail price per bottle. So in region B, not surprisingly, the expectation for price or the average price captured in the region is about 50% higher than region A. So region B, dry wines and higher price, knowing that can help you really at the front end of your business. Now, knowing what's in your region doesn't mean you have to follow that trend. And there's what I'd like to lay up here is sort of a winter metaphor, since we're presenting this in January and there's snow in some places anyway. Two types of marketing. You can, if you remember as a kid, climbing up the hill, pulling the sled behind, how hard that could be walking through the fluffy snow, and versus turning around and sliding down and having a great time. Two different experiences. Well, marketing can be different as well. And some types of marketing are like pulling the sled uphill. If you don't have an existing customer base, if you're in a region with little winery draw for tourism, then you're going to have to really advertise and do lots of events. So the goal here would be that you're really going to have to attract traffic to your winery, because otherwise you're just unknown. And then in some cases you're going to be trying to tap into existing tourism, but it's not wine related. Whereas if you're in an area that already has a wine trail perhaps, or significant wine traffic, you can tap into an existing stream of customers and perhaps a bustling local tourism industry, and even in some areas we're finally getting to a point where we have a restaurant scene that supports its winery. So if you're in this type of scenario, much more like sledding downhill, and you've already got some of your marketing done. So if you go back to that uphill metaphor, you have very little competition, but you've got to attract these people to your winery. There is a slight advantage to that, is that there's very little to compare to the quality of wine or price. You can also set the standard for your region. You're in that unique, there's really no expectations at this point in your region. So you can kind of set the standard, if you will, and you're a novelty. So if a tourist, someone comes by your winery, kind of curious, they come by, they come in, there's going to be a sense of, hey, let's buy some and bring this home. Whereas if you're in the winery region already, you're one of the newbies on the trail perhaps, part of your marketing's already done. You're just trying to tap into an existing stream of traffic. The disadvantage, of course, is competition. But sticking with advantages, you have some known results from existing wineries in the region that can be used to model your results. So there's a little less risk here and a little less effort and money spent on the stage of really building your customer base. And on the other hand as well, you already kind of know what the style of wine preferences are in the region and the price point. Don't overlook the value of common sense when trying to understand your customer base. Does your area have a winery, a cultural center? Is there a portion of the population or tourists in the area that already have a lot of wine experience or expectations? What are the existing tourism themes? What kind of tourists do these themes attract? And what kind of wine do these people enjoy? That's all going to lead you to your business model. So that's more the demand side of the equation, but also ask these kind of common sense questions. What kind of what kind of grapes or fruit are readily available in your region? And what kind of wine do you make well? Because if you are in an area where vinifera is very much in short supply, you're trying to establish yourself as a local winery, you could have an uphill battle. You might be paying a lot of money to get those kind of grapes into your winery or grow them. And then what kind of wine do you and your staff like? Because frankly, those are going to be easier to sell. And are you a proven marketer? Because if you're into an uphill slog, you're going to be an outlier in your region, doing something different. If you've done this kind of massive marketing effort before and had successes, that's kind of nice to know going in. And finally, we're going to tap into this later, how much equity is at your disposal. So let's explore a business model for a moment. Now, there are many, many types of wineries that can provide a wide spectrum of winery experiences, but they are generally going to fall, and you're always at risk when you do a presentation like this in generalizing, but they're generally going to fall into the style of a small boutique premium wine market winery that's trying to target a wine enthusiast, or more of a fun, fruity party atmosphere. The reason I use the word fruity is because we have some wines in our portfolio that express enough fruit that it's sort of palatable to the new entrant into the wine experience. And your target is pretty much everybody with a wallet. So these boutique wineries, generally in our experience in the Northeast, and keep in mind our winery benchmark data and my experience is strictly to the Northeast. If we're talking about California, all these numbers would be different, and some of these comments would be different. But probably 1,000 to 4,000 cases a year is typical for a boutique winery. Much more sophisticated staff on site to guide people through their experience and to be able to handle the questions of the wine enthusiast. Generally not, these types of wineries are not as inviting to buses and limos, and their costs are quite a bit higher. So all across the board, cost of production, the cost of a facility, and cost of labor. Whereas if you look at the larger scale winery or the winery that's got much more open to a vast variety of people and customers, they're going to generally target over 5,000 cases with the potential of growing way beyond that. And oftentimes the potential for wholesale to be a major portion of the business is there, and it's built right into the business plan. The tasting room will oftentimes be built with the thought of handling buses and limos, and the portfolio of wines will be larger and include suite offerings. And all of this also combines with the fact that costs are lower on these types of wineries generally, and wine prices are generally lower as well. So a third point here in our presentation today is after you've decided what your potential customer base is and your business general model is, business focus is, what is the size of this winery? What's the potential for growth? And what's the growth going to be just in the next 5 to 10 years? So you've explored all these things. We've talked about price point and wine style, the style of the business. You're either all about wine or you're about perhaps events and party a little bit and experience. If you try to grow the business beyond the next 5 to 10 years with the size of the facility, et cetera, it can result in some very, very difficult financial trends. A classic mistake is to acquire too much debt in the effort to build a facility that will be as big as you need it for the rest of your time in business. What this generally does is it creates overhead costs that can't be covered initially in the business. And you've implicitly set a sales target that is very high because, first of all, if we back up to overhead costs, what are overhead costs? Overhead costs are repairs, generally interest expense, insurance, real estate taxes, administrative labor, and the like. And if you take on too much debt and build a large facility, you're going to accumulate these kind of costs. If you want to know more about these accounting terms such as overhead, I did another webinar, as Crystal mentioned, last March. It's available on the Northern Grapes website that you can watch and get more tuned into these accounting terms. But when you set that kind of overhead costs into the winery, you've implicitly set a very high sales target. And if you can't reach it, you're going to have to dig in your own pocket to cover it. So from our benchmark, we've discovered, and these next few slides will demonstrate the risk of what I've just mentioned. Overhead is a percent of sales compared to the size of the winery. So the slides on the numbers on the bottom are less than 5,000 cases, between 5,000 and 11,000 cases, and then greater than 11,000 cases. And you can see that overhead is almost double the size of the next set of wineries. Both the next two sizes are quite similar and much lower. The same thing for debt, except for that debt is much more linear in relationship. In other words, there's a certain threshold of expenses you're going to have or costs to build the facility, and the debt related to it tends to go with it. So you're going to spend, in a fairly tight range, just a threshold to be a winery owner. And if you're a small winery, it's going to dominate the financials in your business. If you're a large winery, you dilute it. I have another example of this later. And then we talked about overhead, but the slide talks about variable costs. just your sheer cost to produce a case of wine is going to be much higher the smaller the business is. And this shows how it's somewhat linear, but on the small wineries, it's just a huge impact. And one of the ways we can explain this to you, many of you own vineyards, let's just follow the vineyard costs into a bottle of wine. And if you look at the impacts in the vineyard of the cost per acre, this is how it could flush out. And I've used these costs from our winery benchmark roughly, and yet we've seen costs vary between anywhere from $2,500 an acre to about $6,800 an acre. And it's not uncommon to find small vineyards very high, between 5 and 6. So in this scenario, probably growing vinifera, 2.5 tons an acre, this results in $2,000 a ton total cost for grapes, regardless of what they're worth in the open market. This is your cost. Now, if we have a yield rate or a crush yield of 150 gallons per ton net into the bottle, that translates to $13 a gallon or $31.73 per case, just in grape costs. You have to add a lot more to that for bottling, supplies, label, cork, lab supplies, etc. And if we translated this to $6,500 an acre, it would come out to $42 just for the grape cost. And can you, I'm sorry, go back to this slide, can you be profitable at this cost? So style and size also relate to costs, and so if your construction style should match your business model, whether you're boutique or otherwise, and you should ask yourself the question, can I build a reasonably nice tasting room that could be expanded later? And what about expanding the production facility? So generally, you're going to size your winery for the next 5 to 10 years, and don't get too big too early, hopefully. But that takes some forethought, because if you're a piece of real estate, you may or may not have the ability to expand off the side of a building, let's say, unless you carefully place those buildings at the beginning. So let's evaluate your capital. Capital, when I say capital, I'm generally referring to how much net worth you have to put into this project. Not just how much net worth you have, but how much cash can you put in the project or assets. And more importantly, perhaps, is how much of that is liquid, so that you can keep that on the sidelines and provide for the cash flow needs of the business as you build into this next phase of your business. And don't underestimate the non-monetary impact of owner labor. When we look at this part of what I'm trying to say here, kind of envision this. Is this winery your second job? So you've got a full-time day job, and this is what you're going to do on nights and weekends. Or can you contribute the next 5 years full-time, and can you do that without taking a salary? So what I'm trying to portray here is two extremes on the opposite side of the pendulum. Those are very big impacts to your ability to get through this phase, and you need to know it going in. So first of all, you need to fully explore what assets you're going to need to buy over the next 4 to 5 years, fully explore equipment, and don't forget inventory, and then compare your capital need with your resources, and then calculate the amount of debt that you're going to need. In this phase, you should explore alternatives. Will you fully be able to utilize your own bottling line or fresh pack? Will you fully be able to utilize the size of your tasting room, etc.? Should you consider borrowing equipment or even custom crush or other custom services like custom bottling? Should you perhaps rent a tasting room for this next phase? And should you expand your offerings to the public by buying grapes rather than just growing everything you do? By the way, debt makes a big difference when you get to the bottom line. But all of us understand instinctively it's a drag on cash flow, both principal and interest. But I don't know if all of us realize that interest expense becomes a drag on your ability to even grow net worth, so you can make it to the next phase of your business cycle. If you look at principal and interest and its impact on a small winery versus large, $500,000 of debt, 20-year term on 2,000 cases at 4% interest would be implicitly setting a profit target of $18 a case. And in my experience, that's at the very top end of profitability. And it's very, very few wineries will ever hit that. Whereas if you were a 15,000 case winery with the same debt, that comes to a mere $2.42 a case. It's a big, big difference. So finally, create a budget for a typical year once you've reached your sales goal. See if that works with the debt load and with all of the other costs, but then go back and create transition year budgets for what the actual cash flow need will be before you reach your sales target. This will guide you into how much cash you'll have to infuse into the business during those interim years. After you do your budget, go back to the capital plan and debt plan and see if it still makes sense. And finally, keep your options open. Establish capital and debt plan that gives you some room for error. That way, if it doesn't go according to plan, you have some room to change it. I think an expandable building design is a good thing, even though it might cost you a little more that way. And keep in mind, if you're going to stay small and be a boutique winery, then you're going to have to be even more conservative with that and consider your alternatives. So let's wrap up by reviewing key concepts. Build the right size winery, build the right style winery, understand your marketing challenges, understand the difference between boutique and large-scale wineries, deal with reality in terms of cash flow in the future and in the immediate next step, and bottom line is manage this critical step to provide yourself options in case it doesn't go as well as you thought. So that's my presentation for today, and I have time for questions, Kristen. So here's by the way, a link to our winery benchmark as well. I'll leave up.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So the first question that was asked was, what do you mean by custom crushing and bottling?
Good question. Custom crushing and bottling is just the process of going to another facility that will do basically most of the winemaking for you, put it into bulk wine, and then if you wish, they'll put it in a bottle. Sometimes let you label it or label it themselves.
Okay. The second question is there an ideal capital for a 5,000 to 10,000 case winery?
Oh boy. I remember I struggled with this question the first time. The ideal amount of capital, what was that, Chrislyn, for a 5,000 case winery?
5,000 to 10,000 case.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to answer this probably slightly different than the first time. You're generally targeting not to be less than 50% equity. So your equity should be at 50% of total assets. I think that's a reasonable approach, and I don't have any further detail to give you without more knowledge of the situation.
Okay, the third question. I've heard that the cost of inventory is a major stumbling block as wineries ramp up production. Are there ways to manage or minimize these costs?
That's a very, very good question, because many people forget to track or factor this into their business plan. And yes, managing it is possible. Generally, we would guide people at a young phase of their business not to build more than 2 years worth of inventory based on your projected sales targets, as long as those sales targets are reasonable. And you'll find that white wines you'll need to carry less, but red you'll have to carry more. So the more red you do, you might go over the 2 years. The more white you do, you could probably cut that back. So perhaps even 1.5 years worth of inventory.
Okay. The fourth question, how do you take into account lower margins from wholesale sales? Or are the figures assuming 100% retail sales?
Yes, a good question, and the data I'm showing you here, of course without numbers, is winery benchmark data, and the average winery in that data set is selling 45% of their wine through wholesale means. So yes, it includes wholesale data in it.
Okay, the fifth question, is there a rule of thumb for a percentage of expenses or percentage of gross income to spend on advertising?
This question I can relate both to the winery benchmark as well as to other benchmarks we do in retail, and it seems to be around 3%. And I would say if you're at 3% of gross income. So if you're you're at that early phase in your business, you might want to spend over that because your existing income is fairly low and you're trying to build that. So even I've seen as high as 4, 4.5, maybe even 5%, but somewhere in that ballpark. But you should be getting it back to 2.5, 3% when you're getting back into your stabilized position.
Okay, then the last question. The northern Michigan Straits area is an emerging wine region with approximately 6 wineries online this year. What are the merits to a co-op to market and sell for the wineries?
Yeah, this is a challenging question because we do see a little bit of this type of activity, people trying to set up sort of cooperative sales shops, let's say. They may buy a facility on a wine trail and have several wineries represented, or perhaps the co-op might be done to buy various supplies or that type of thing. In general, I see very little of this done, and I find it, oftentimes I see that it's problematic in terms of managing it and pleasing everyone. I think the wine trails have some pretty good success. I think that's probably a better business model overall. But I don't want you to think that you can't do it. I think it just has some challenges.
Okay, we're done. So Greg, thank you so much for agreeing to do this redo of the webinar. So we've got a great quality audio presentation to have online. I know that I appreciate it, and I'm sure that everybody who is participating in the Northern Grapes Project appreciates it as well. So thanks again.
Thank you, Chrislyn, and thanks for the opportunity to present to this group again.
All right, thanks.